In this video, you'll learn how to use Python and JavaScript to create a full-stack web application. We'll be using Django for the backend and React for the front end, and we'll implement authentication using JWT tokens. Now, as a bonus, I'm even going to show you how to deploy this application completely for free. So by the time you finish this video, you'll have an entire project completed. It will be a great starting point that you can extend and build upon, and you'll even learn about how to get a free deployment so you can share this with other people and you can see it working online, not just on your local machine. I'm going to go over a ton of stuff in this video. You're going to learn a ton. And with that said, let's get into a quick demo so you can see what you're going to build. So I have a quick demo in front of me that I'm going to run you through, but I do want to mention that this video is more designed for intermediates. This is not a beginner tutorial, and I'm going to assume that you already understand both Python and JavaScript and have some familiarity in Django and React. That said, I will of course explain everything that I'm doing, and I will make it as clear as possible, but I'm not going to be going over basic syntax like for loops, what a variable is, or anything that is more in the beginner section. If you are looking for more beginner tutorials, I have tons of them on my channel, but this is for those of you that really want to level up, understand how to use multiple languages, and create a more advanced application that can actually be deployed and have some real world use. With that said though, let's go through a quick demo. First, let's have a look at how this works. So you can see that we have a login page. We also have a register page. If I go here, so I can start by registering a new account. So I can do something like Time123. Let's set a password. We're going to wait a second for it to load, and then we can log into this account and you'll see the main functionality that we've implemented. So now that we're registered, let's log in. Okay, wait for that to load, and then it will bring us to a page where we'll be able to create some different nodes. Now, I know this seems really basic, but I promise you this is what you need to understand to create some more advanced applications, how you associate data with specific users, and how you create, read, update, and delete data. That's what I'm going to be showing you here. So let's do new note, test content here, okay, and then we'll submit this, and the note should be created in just a second. You'll notice there's a little bit of lag just because of how the deployment's set up, and if we wait, we should see that the note appears here. So let's refresh the page here, and you can see that the note pops up. Now, it's obviously not the prettiest thing in the world, but that's not the point of this tutorial, and if we want, we can click on delete. Again, we just have to wait a few seconds, and the note will be deleted. So that's it. That's what I'm going to be showing you how to build, but this involves building the front end, building the back end, having authenticated requests, registering users, creating new users, signing in, logging out. There's a lot of stuff in this video, and I promise you're going to learn a bunch. However, there is something I need you to know about right now, which is your chance to win a Cybertruck or $100,000 cash. Now, the way to do that is really just to complete this video and develop and deploy this application that we're going to build step by step on Choreo. Now, I've partnered with them for this video, but they're running this WSO2 code challenge, which is giving you the chance to win a Cybertruck, which is pretty incredible. Now, in order to actually enter this challenge, all you have to do is develop and deploy an application. It has to have a front end and a back end, and you have to deploy it to production using the Choreo platform. Again, I'm going to walk you through doing that in this video. If you want to maximize your chances of winning, there's some bonuses that you can get here by adding additional functionality like connecting with databases, and the key dates that you'll want to know about here are the following. Obviously, I'll link this in the description so you can check it out, but the main date you're going to want to know is April 30th. You want to finish your project before then so that you'll be entered into the draw. It gives you some information on how to submit. I'll let you guys read that from the link in the description. And there's also going to be 10 other winners that will receive a 14-inch MacBook Pro with an Apple M3 chip. So even if you don't win the Cybertruck, you have 10 other chances to win a MacBook Pro. Pretty incredible competition. And the great thing is you literally just have to follow along with this video and you'll already have a project that you can use to submit. Obviously, you can make it better if you want to, but this as a bare minimum is all you need to be able to enter the competition. So with that said, I hope you're excited. Let's get into the code here and start by writing our backend. So let's begin here by walking through a quick overview of what it is that we actually need to do. Now we need to start by building the backend. The backend is going to be our API, it's going to store our data, and it's what's going to handle our different users or any other information we're storing related to them. Once we build the backend, we need to build the front end. The front end is the user-facing component of the application, which will allow people to interact with the API, in our case, to make new nodes, to sign in, to sign out, etc. Once we do that, we're then going to deploy a database, and we're going to connect the database to our backend so we have something that's a little bit more robust and that's stored in the cloud. That means we could access our database from other sources, and that's typically best practice. After that, we're actually going to deploy the backend, then we're going to deploy the front end, and we're going to connect both of them together. But first, we're going to begin with our backend. So what we want to do here is open up a directory in Visual Studio Code or any other code editor you want to use. In this case, I've just opened one called Django React Tutorial. It's on my desktop. You can store it anywhere you want. So open up that directory and then change into that directory in your terminal. And the first thing we're going to do here is create a virtual environment to install our various Python packages. So to do that, the command is going to be python 3-m venv and then env. And if you're on Windows, the command is going to be Python. So you're just going to exclude the 3. So we're going to run that. It's going to create a new virtual environment directory for us. What we're going to do now is activate that virtual environment. So to do that, we're going to type source, then this is going to be env/bin/activate. And if the activation is correct, you should see a prefix before your terminal line. Now, if you're on Windows, the command to activate is a little bit different. It should be env/scripts/activate.bat. If that doesn't work, you'll need to look up the specific command for whatever shell you're using, PowerShell, command prompt, etc., because it is a little bit different. Okay, now that the virtual environment is activated, what we're going to do is install all of the dependencies for this project inside of here. Now to do that, we're actually going to create a new file here called requirements.txt, and we're going to paste all of the different requirements we need, so all of the Python packages, directly inside of here. So what we're going to do is go to a link in the description. I'll leave this link down below. It's going to bring you to a GitHub repository that looks something like this. Now this GitHub repo has all of the code you need for the entire project. So if you're getting stuck, come here, you can look at it. It has all of the different files, all of the completed code. And if I tell you to copy something, you can find it from here. Now in our case, we're just going to go into the backend directory and we're going to find requirements.txt. And you'll see this has a list of all of the requirements that we need. So what I'm going to do is just copy these, and I'm going to go back, and I'm going to paste it inside of my requirements.txt, because we're going to use this file to have all of the requirements we need and to install all of them in our environment. Now notice we need Django cores headers. This allows us to fix that cross-origin request issue that you've probably seen in your terminal before. If you haven't seen that, don't worry about it, but we do need this. We then need Django REST Framework, Django REST Framework Simple JWT for handling our JWT authentication. Then a few other dependencies we need in here as well. You don't need to worry about all of them. This one here is for working with a PostgreSQL database, which we'll be doing later. And then python.env for loading in some environment variables. Again, don't stress too much about what these are, but we do need to install them. To do that, we're going to type pip install -r and then requirements.txt. Make sure that's in the virtual environment that you activated, so you see this prefix here. When you hit enter, it should install all of those different dependencies for you, and then we'll be good to go. Okay, so now that we've done that, what we're going to do is create a new Django project. To make a new Django project, we're going to type Django-admin and then start project, and then we're going to give it a name. In this case, we'll call it backend. Now, I recommend you go with the same names as me, and this should make a new directory for you. We're now going to change into the backend directory, and we're going to make a new Django app. Now, apps are where we can actually write our own custom views and custom code. You'll notice here, if you look in the backend directory, we have another directory named the same thing. This is kind of the main directory where we have some settings, we link different applications, but this isn't where we write a lot of custom Django code. Where we write our custom Django code is in an app, and we can have multiple different apps for different types of things we're doing to organize logic out. Maybe we have an app for authentication for a certain component of our application. In this case, we just need a single app. So what we're going to do is type python manage.py, and then this is going to be start app, and we're going to call this API. Okay, so that will make a new directory for us called API. Now that we've done that, what we're going to do is we're going to go into backend and we're going to go into settings.py. Now inside of here, I'm going to put a bunch of settings that we need to write. It's very important that you watch this very carefully and do exactly what I do. If you miss even the smallest thing, it will mess up your project. So just be very careful here going through and following with what I show you. And if for some reason you're getting some errors, you can just copy the settings.py file from the GitHub repository, okay? So we're going to start right from the very top, and we're going to import something that we need. We're going to say from datetime, import the time delta. We're then going to say from .env, import load.env, and we're going to import OS. Then we're going to call the function load.env. Now you'll see why we need these imports in a second, but what this one will do here is load an environment variable file for us, so that we can use that for having credentials for our database and other things that we need. We're then going to scroll down, and we're going to go to where it says allowed hosts. Now for allowed hosts, we're going to put an asterisk inside of a string, and this will allow any different host to host our Django application. Now the reason we do this is just so we don't get an error later on when we deploy this application and it's running on some host that it's not aware of. Okay, so we're going to put allowed host here. And what I'm going to do now is copy in some configuration that we need. Now this is related to our JWT tokens, which we're going to talk about in a second. So I'm going to paste these in, and you'll see that we have REST framework and simple JWT. Now, if you don't want to write this yourself, you can just, again, go copy it from the settings.py file in the GitHub repository. But what we're specifying here is the default authentication classes and the default permission classes. Now, we need these when we're working with our JWT tokens. I don't need to get into it too much, but you just need to specify this configuration for the JWT tokens to work properly. Next, we're going to specify the lifetime for our JWT tokens. So the access token, which is what we'll use to actually access different routes, will expire in 30 minutes. You can change that if you want. And the refresh token will expire in 1 day. The refresh token is something we can use to get a new access token. So your refresh token should always have a larger expiration date than the access token. Okay, now that we have that, we're going to move down into installed apps. Now in installed apps, we're going to add API, which is the name of the application that we added here. So the one that we created, that's what you need to add. Then we're going to add REST_framework. Again, make sure you spell this exactly as I have here. And then we are going to add the CORS headers. Now, what we're going to do for the rest of the settings, or at least a lot of the other ones you see, is enable CORS or add some configuration so that CORS is not an issue for us. CORS is a problem when you have a different origin trying to hit this backend. So you've probably seen this before if you've worked with any kind of front end and back end where it says there's some CORS issue and you can't make a request. That's what I'm just kind of enabling here, or I'm fixing for us preemptively so we don't get that issue later on. Okay, so we're going to add CORS headers. We're then going to go into middleware, and we're going to add a middleware for CORS. Now I'm just going to copy in the middleware so I don't mess it up. So it's going to look like this. It's going to be CORS headers dot middleware dot CORS middleware with the correct capitalization, okay? And then simply save the file, and we'll keep moving down. Now, as we move down, what we are going to go down to is all the way at the bottom, and all the way at the bottom, we're going to paste in 2 variables here. We're going to write them out. I'm going to say CORS underscore allow underscore all underscore origins is going to be equal to true. I'm then going to say CORS underscore allow underscore credentials is equal to true. Now, typically, if I could disable my cap locks here, sorry. Typically, you would actually just allow a specific origin, not all of them. But in our case, all of our origins will be slightly different based on how we do the deployment. So I'm just enabling all of the different origins to work here so that you don't get any issue and you can proceed with the tutorial. Later, if you wanted to make this more secure, there's some changes you could make inside of the settings. But for now, this will just make sure you don't hit any roadblocks, which is my main goal right now. So that should be all we need to do for the settings. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my requirements.txt file now, and I'm going to place that inside of the backend directory and just leave the environment variable, or the environment Python virtual environment, outside of this directory. Okay, so we have our backend directory. We've messed with the settings. What I want to do now is quickly explain to you how JWT tokens work, and then we'll start implementing them here in the REST framework, which is the first thing we need to do. Okay, so what is a JWT token? Well, I actually have an entire video on this, so I'll link it here in case you want to watch it. But this stands for JSON Web Tokens. Now, the JSON Web Token will act as our permissions or our authentication every time we access a website. The idea is we have a front end, and the front end is separate from our backend. So every time we make a request to the backend needs to know who we are and what we have permissions to do. So what we'll do is we'll include a token along with our request to the backend, and that token can be decoded and understood to represent a certain set of permissions. So for example, I may sign in as my user Tim. That user will be granted a token, and then that token will be used with all future requests to tell the backend who's actually interacting with it and what permissions they have. Now, fortunately for us, a lot of this difficult logic we don't need to write ourselves. It will already be handled by Django. But what I want you to understand is that the basic flow goes like this. We have some front end, and the front end is communicating with the backend. It's doing that through a request. It will send a request to the backend, and then we will receive a response from the backend. So let's say we first visit our front end. The first thing that we'll need to do is we'll need to get access to a JWT token so that we're able to actually interact with the backend and perform some operations. Now, in order to do that, what we will do is we will pass some credentials to our front end. So maybe a username or a password or something along those lines. The front end will then take those credentials and send it to the backend. And it will ask the backend, it'll say, hey, look at these credentials and grant me a token based on these credentials. So assuming the username and the password is correct, then we will be granted two tokens, an access token and a refresh token. The access token is what we'll use with all of our requests, and the refresh token is what we'll use to refresh the access token. Now, what our front end will do at that time is it will store both the access token and the refresh token. Now, it will store them so it can continue to use them with future requests, and we don't have to constantly sign into the application. Now, let's say that we are using this access token and all of a sudden it expires. Maybe it's been 30 minutes and the token is no longer valid. Well, what the front end will do is it will simply submit the refresh token to a specific route on the back end. And if that refresh token is valid, a new access token will be sent back to us. We'll store that token and we'll continue using that. Now, the reason we do that is because if an access token were to be leaked, we want that access token to expire in a certain amount of time so it can't be used permanently and give someone else access to our account. So the concept is we're going to expire the token relatively quickly and we can keep refreshing it. And then after our refresh token expires, we need to actually sign back into the website altogether to get a new set of refresh and access tokens. There's obviously more to this, but that's the basic idea behind JWT token authentication, and that's what we're going to implement here. You'll learn more about it as we go through this example. So what we need to do in order to actually grant an access token is we need to have a set of credentials. So the first thing we need to do is figure out a way to create a new user. Once we can create a new user, we can then store their username and their password, and we can use their credentials, so their username and their password, to log in and access the access token for that user. So we're going to go into our API view here, and we're going to create a file called serializers, if we spell this correctly, .py. Now inside serializers, we're going to import a few things. We're going to say from Django.contrib.auth. And this is going to be models, import the user model. So let's spell import correctly. We're then going to say from REST_framework, import serializers. Let me zoom in a little bit so we can read this better. And what we're going to do now is create something known as a serializer. Now, what Django does is it uses something known as an ORM. An ORM is an object relational mapping. What this does is it maps Python objects to the corresponding code that needs to be executed to make a change in the database. So the idea is, from the developer perspective, we can just write normal Python code, and Django in the backend will automatically handle all of the database operations that need to be performed. Now, where a serializer comes in is that with our API, we're going to use something known as JSON. Now, JSON is JavaScript object notation, and this is the standard format for communicating with web applications. So from our API, we're going to be accepting JSON data that contains things like the username and the password for a new user we want to make. We'll also be returning JSON data with information about the response that this API is giving to whoever made a request. So what we need to do is create a serializer, which is something that can take this Python object and convert it into JSON data that can be used in the communication with other applications, right? So it will allow us to take in some JSON data and convert that into the Python equivalent code, and then vice versa, have some Python code and convert that into the JSON equivalent format. So what we're going to do is say class user serializer, and this is going to inherit from the serializers dot the model serializer. Now inside of here, we're going to say class meta, and we're going to specify the model that we want to serialize as the user model. The user model is built into Django, and it represents a user, right, within Django. Then we're going to say fields are equal to ID, username, and password. Now these are all the fields that we want to serialize when we are accepting a new user and when we are returning a new user. Remember, the serializer is used in two different places. Next, we're going to specify extra underscore kwargs, and this is going to be equal to password colon, and then we're going to specify write only equal to true. Now what this does here, if we spell true correctly, is it tells Django that we want to accept a password when we're creating a new user, but we don't want to return the password when we are giving information about a user. So that when we specify this as write only, it means no one can read what the password is, which is intentional, okay? So now we're going to have another class, or sorry, not another class. We're going to make a function here called create, and we're going to take in self and validated underscore data. And inside of here, we're going to say user is equal to user dot objects dot create underscore user, and we're going to pass to this asterisk asterisk validated data. We're then going to return the user. Now all this is doing is implementing a method that will be called when we want to create a new version of this user. In this case, to create a new version of the user, what we're going to do is we're going to accept the validated data. This is data that will have already passed all of the checks that the serializer does for us, where it looks for a valid username and it looks for a valid password. Really, what will happen is the serializer will look at this model. It will look at all of the fields on that model and the ones that we've specified here. It will make sure that they are valid. And if they're valid, it will pass the data here. Once the data has been passed here, it's up to us to actually create the new user. To do that, we can say the user is equal to user.objects.createUser, and then we pass all of the data. What we're doing here is just splitting up the keyword arguments and passing them in as such from a dictionary. Now you don't need to really understand how that works, but that's what's happening. And then we return the user. Okay, now that we've done that, what we're going to do is go to views.py. Now inside of views.py, we're going to write a simple view that allows us to create a new user. So we have the serializer, but we still need the view or the path to make this user. So we're going to say from Django.contrib.auth.models import the user again. Okay. We're then going to say from the REST framework import, and this is going to be generics. We're then going to say from .serializers, the file we just made, import the user serializer, and then we're going to say from REST framework underscore simple j, or sorry, that's actually incorrect, from REST framework dot permissions, apologies, import, and this is going to be is authenticated and allow any. Now what we're going to do is make the class-based view that will allow us to implement creating a new user, or kind of like a registration form. So we're going to say class, and this is going to be create user view. And then what we're going to do is inherit from the generics dot create API view. Now this is a generic view that's built into Django that will automatically handle creating a new user or creating a new object for us. Now in order for this to work, we need to specify a few values. So we're going to say the query set is equal to user.objects.all. We're then going to pass the serializer class, which is equal to our user. And we're going to say the permission classes are equal to allow any. What we're doing here is we're specifying, okay, here's a list of all of the different objects that we're going to be looking at when we're creating a new one to make sure we don't create a user that already exists. This is the serializer class, which tells this view what kind of data we need to accept to make a new user. So in this case, a username and a password. And then the permission class specifies who can actually call this. In this case, we're going to allow anyone, even if they're not authenticated, to use this view to create a new user. Okay, so that's it for the view. Now that we've done that, we're going to go to urls.py within this backend directory. So notice we've moved outside of the app directory and we're in that main backend directory. Inside of here, I'm just going to remove all of the comments so it's a little bit cleaner. And what we're going to do is configure all of our different URLs so that we can kind of link them up and we can go to the correct routes. Now we need to import a few things here. So we're going to say from API.views import, and this is going to be the this needs to be views. We're going to say create user view. So this is the view we just wrote inside of here. We're just importing it over here. We're then going to say from the REST framework, this time it's going to be simple JWT.views. We're going to import the token obtain pair view and the token refresh view. Now let me just save this and format it, and let's make this a bit smaller so we can read it. Now, what these views are pre-built views that allow us to obtain our access and refresh tokens and to refresh the token. Okay, I know it seems a little bit strange, but they're already built for us. And now that we've implemented what we need to do, which is creating a new user, once the user is created, we can use these pre-built views to obtain the token for that user and to effectively sign them in. Now we're going to write a few paths here. These paths are URLs that we can go to that will call a specific function or do some type of operation. So the first one we're going to have is API/user/register, and make sure you always include the trailing slash here. Now this is going to call the create user view.as_view, and we're going to give this a name, and we'll say this is register. So that means when we go to this route right here, it's going to call that view that we just created, and it's going to allow us to make a new user. We then are going to implement the view for actually getting our token. Now that's already built for us, but we just need to link it up. So we're going to say API/token/, and then this is going to be the token obtain pair view.as_view, and then name is equal to, and we'll say get_token. You can name these whatever you want. It doesn't really matter what you have here. Next, we're going to have the view for refreshing the token. So we're going to say API/token/refresh, and this is going to be the token refresh view.asView, and then the name will just be equal to refresh. Okay, we're almost done. We're now going to do another path, and this path is going to be the API-auth view. Okay, make sure you have your trailing slash, and this is going to simply include all of the URLs from the rest_framework.urls. And we need to just import the include function from here where it says Django.urls. Okay, so those are all the URLs we currently need. What we've done is we've linked our register view, we've linked our token obtain pair view, and our token refresh view. We've also linked all of the pre-built URLs that we need from the REST framework. You don't have to worry too much about those. Okay, so at this point, we have mostly everything done to actually start working with this and seeing how it works. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring up our terminal. Let's clear all of this. And we're going to start by making some migrations on our database. Now, whenever you start a new Django project or you make any significant changes that involve the data model, what you need to do is run some migrations. So the first thing you'll do is type Python manage.py, and then this is going to be make migrations. Now what make migrations will do is it will create the file that specifies the migrations that need to be performed. So that's what we're going to do to start. And it probably will say that we don't have any migrations, but let's see what it says here if it runs. So yeah, it says no changes detected. So that's fine, but I just wanted to show you that this is the process. Now, once you've made the migrations, you need to actually migrate. So it's kind of two steps. You're making the migrations, and then you're actually applying the migrations. And the way you apply them is by using the migrate command. So we're going to go ahead and hit enter, and you'll notice that it will migrate and make all of these changes. And really what this will do is provision the database so that it has the correct tables and everything set up. So whenever you connect to a new database, you want to do those same steps again so that you're provisioning the new database. So now that that's set up, we can run our application. Now to run our application, we'll type Python manage.py and then run server. Okay, so let's do that. And you should see that the server starts running and it tells you the URL it's running on. So what we can do is open that up. I'm just going to bring it over to my other screen here. And you'll notice that right away, we get this kind of 404 not found. It's just because we haven't gone to any of the routes that we've defined. So what we can do now is define or go to those routes. So we're going to go to the the API /user/register route. And when we do that, what is the issue here? Did I spell something correctly? User got unexpected keyword arguments context. All right, so I've found the error here, kind of a silly one. Under my serializer class here for my create user view, this should say user serializer, not user. So let's save that now and go back to where we were before and refresh, and notice now it brings us to the correct page. Okay, so let's look at this. I'm gonna go into HTML form. And what I can do is pass a username and password and create a new user. So let's begin doing that, and then we can see how we sign in as that user and get the access token. All right, so I just created a new user here. And what we'll do once the user is created is we'll go to the root that is API/token. Now it's gonna bring us to this page where we'll ask us to pass our credentials. And once we pass our credentials, it will give us our access token. So let me type in my credentials and then let's get the token. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and hit on post here, and you'll notice now that what it gives me is a refresh token and an access token. Now this is what our front end would store, and then it would use this access token with every request that it sends in order to actually access the different protected routes. So that's the idea here, but I'll show you that if I copy this access token and I now go to the refresh route, you'll see that what I can do is pass my refresh token and post. And when I do this, it says token is wrong type. Maybe it's because it started with a space or something. I'm not sure exactly why we're getting that issue with the refresh token. Maybe it's just based on how I'm calling it here. But idea is that this should have given us a new access token, not this issue. All right, so I just went back and I realized I had copied the wrong token. So now when I paste in the refresh token, it gives me a new access token and all is working. Okay, so those are the main routes, right? We wanted to have the ability to get the tokens, to refresh the token, to create a new user. Now that we have these written, what we want to do is start writing some routes for our authenticated users. So now that we have the ability to authenticate them using these tokens, we want to give them the ability to, for example, create a new note, delete a note, something along those lines. I know it seems simple, but trust me, this is what we need to understand so we know how to connect data to authenticated users. So let's go back to VS Code and let's start writing what we need for creating different notes. So I'm going to clear this here and shut down the server. And what we're going to do now is we're going to make a new model inside of API models.py. Now this model will be for our note, so let's write that out. So inside here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say from django.contrib.auth.models, I'm going to import the user model. I'm now going to make a new class called note. We can zoom in on this a little bit. And this is going to be a model. So we're going to say that this is models.model. Now, as I said before, Django uses an ORM, an object relational mapping. So what I'll do is I'll write out the model definition in Python, and then Django can automatically handle converting this into the correct database code. So what we do here inside of models is we define the Python version of our models, which specify the type of fields we want to store on this model or in this data or table, whatever you want to refer to it as. And then Django will automatically map it for us and add the corresponding table, rows, etc. in our database. So we're going to have a note, and for our note, we want the following. We want to have a title. Now the title is going to be models.character field, and we're going to specify the max length of the title, which is equal to 100. Next, we're going to have some content. Now the content will be equal to a models.text field, and we're not going to specify any minimum or maximum length. We'll just let them put as much text as they want. Next, we're going to have a created at field, and created at is going to be models.datetime field, and inside here, we're going to have auto underscore now underscore add equal to true. Next, we're going to have our author, and the author is going to be the models dot foreign key. We'll talk about this in a second. And this is going to reference our user. And we're going to have onDelete equal to models dot cascade and the related underscore name equal to notes. Okay, lastly, let's zoom out so we can read all of this. We're going to define an underscore underscore string underscore underscore method, and we're simply going to return the self.title. Okay, let's quickly talk about what we just did here, specifically with the foreign key. Well, first we added the title, maximum length of 100. Content is just a text field, that makes sense. Created at models.datetime field. When we add this argument right here, it tells it that we don't want to be passing this. We want it to just automatically populate whenever we make a new version or a new instance of this note. Then we have our author. Now the author is specifying who made this note. Whenever we have that, well, we can use something known as a foreign key. Now a foreign key can link something like a user, because that's what it is in this case, with some data that belongs to that user. Now we can use foreign keys in a lot of different situations where we want to link different pieces of data together. In this case, I want each user to have a collection of notes, and I want there to be one user that can potentially have many different notes. Now this is known as a one-to-many relationship. So what I do is for my author, I say that this is going to be a models.foreign key. When we specify foreign key, that's indicating that we're going to be linking with some other data source. In this case, it's the user. Then we specify the onDelete. Now what onDelete means is if I were to delete this user, so the thing that's being referenced, what should we do? Well, models.cascade simply says that we should also delete all of the notes that this user has. That's all it's doing. Then as the related name, this tells us what field name we want to put on the user that references all of its notes. So from my user object, I'll now be able to actually access the .notes, and .notes will give me all of these note objects that the user has created. Okay, so that's how we link data with a user. We use a foreign key. There's a lot more about foreign keys that you can learn. I actually have all kinds of other Django videos on my channel that go through foreign keys and more advanced relationships, but for now, we're just gonna stick with this. Okay, so now that we have our model created, we're gonna make a serializer for this model, because remember, this is an API, and we need to be able to convert this into JSON data so that we can receive it and we can return it. So we're gonna go up to the top here, and we're gonna say from.models import the note. Then we're going to make our serializer. This is going to be the note serializer. Okay, if we could spell this correctly. And this is going to be serializers dot the model serializer. We're then going to specify our meta class here. And inside here, we're going to say the model is equal to the note. And then we're going to say our fields are equal to ID, title, content, and then created at and author. And for our extra underscore quarks, we're going to pass author. Okay, so let's specify this. And this is going to say read underscore only true. Now what that tells us is actually the opposite of what we did here for our user serializer, which says, hey, we should be able to read who the author is, but we shouldn't be able to write who the author is. The reason we're doing that is because we'll manually set who the author is based on who creates this note. We don't want someone to be able to tell us who the author is. So if I'm signed in and I'm authenticated and I make the note, well, then I become the author. So we're specifying it as read only, which means we can't write it. We can just read what it is. Okay, so I know it's a bit weird, but we want to make sure that for certain fields, we do that, so that we can see them, but we can't set them, or we can set them, but we can't see them. And in this case, author is one of those where we want that to be set by the backend, not by someone just deciding who the author should be. Okay, so now that we have our serializer and our model, we're gonna go into views, and we're gonna make some views for creating a note and for deleting a note. Now first, let's import the note. So to do that, we're gonna say from.models import note. Now we're also gonna import the note serializer in the same line here as our user serializer. Now let's go above and let's make a view for creating a new note. Now to do that, we'll say class note list create, okay? And this is gonna be generics.list create API view. What we're gonna do in here is the following. We're going to specify our serializer class, which is going to be equal to the note serializer, and our permission classes, which will be equal to, and this is going to be is authenticated. Now what this says is that you cannot call this root unless you're authenticated and you pass a valid JWT token. Perfect. Now notice that we're using list create view, not just create. The reason for that is that this view will actually do two things. It will list all of the notes that the user has created, or it will create a new note. So there's two functions here. So first thing we're going to do is specify a method called get query set. Now that's not what I wanted, but I want to return from here, and we're going to write up here that our user is equal to self.request.user. Now this is really nice, but in Django, if we want to get the user that is actually authenticated and that is interacting with this root, all we have to do inside of our class-based views is we write self.request.user. Now that's going to give us the user object. So it says abstract base user or anonymous user. Don't worry about that, but it's going to give us the correct user because we are actually authenticated. We can then use that user to filter our notes and just get any of the notes that were written by this user. So if we wanted to get all of the notes, we would just do note.objects.all. But if we want to get all of the notes that are written by a specific user, we instead pass filter, and then we pass the author equal to the user. Now, this needs to be the lowercase user, sorry. And what that does is filter by this field. Now we could filter by all kinds of other fields as well, right? Like I could filter by the title equal to something specific if I wanted to do that. But in this case, we do the author filter, and that effectively is just going to get us all of the notes written by this user. Okay, so that's why I've written get query set rather than having query set specified here, because I need access to the request object, which specifies the user, so that I can then filter all of the notes by that user. This also means that you're only able to view the notes that were written by you. You can't view notes that were written by someone else. Okay, next, we're going to have a perform create, and this is going to take in self and the serializer. Now this is just because we want to do some custom kind of configuration here when we create a new user. So we're overriding the create method. Okay, so all these generic views, you can just leave them as is. And as long as you specify a serializer class, a permission class, and a query set, it's automatically going to work. And it will let you create, list, etc., whatever it specifies here. But if you want some custom functionality, which we need, you need to override specific methods. And in this case, we need to override the get query set and the perform create. Now, how do you know that? Well, you do have to reference the Django documentation because there's no way you can memorize all of this stuff. And even myself, I don't have this memorized. Like I'm looking off of some pre-made notes because there's no way I would memorize this. When I was originally writing it out, I had to go look at the the Django documentation to know what it is I had to do here. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to say if the serializer.is_valid, then we're going to say serializer.save, and we're going to pass the author equal to the self.request.user. Otherwise, we're simply going to print the serializer.errors. Okay, so what is this? What are we doing here? How does this work? Well, serializer itself, so this class, when we pass to it different data, it will tell us if it's valid or not. Now, what happens automatically in these generic list views is any data that's required to create the note will be accepted. It will be passed into the serializer that we've written here, and the serializer will check against all of the different fields on the model and make sure that the data is accurate. So we'll check that the title is not above the maximum length, for example. We'll check that we have some content, that we have a date, whatever, right? It'll check all of the things that we need. So what we're doing here is we're getting access to that serializer object, and we need to manually check if it's valid. So we say, okay, if this is valid, if the serializer passed all of the checks with the data that was passed to create a new version of the note, what we'll do is we'll save the serializer, and when we save the serializer, it will make a new version of the note, and anything we pass here will be an additional field that will add on to that note. So in this case, we're adding the author because remember, in the serializer, we specified that the author was read only. So it won't be passed into us. We have to manually add that ourselves, which is what we're doing. Okay, so that is how we create a note. Now let's do a view for deleting a note, which is a little bit easier. So we're going to say class note delete, and this will be generics.destroy API view. Now inside here, we're going to specify the query set, and this will be equal to note.objects.all. We're then going to say the serializer class is equal to the note serializer. We're going to say the permission classes are equal to is authenticated. And actually, I realized that we don't need to specify the query set. We're just going to go down here and we're going to say define get query set. And it's actually going to be the exact same as this one. So we're just going to copy this and paste it here, because similar to up here, we want to make sure that you can only delete notes that you own. So the query set of notes that we're allowed to delete are simply ones that are within this filtered list. So sorry, we don't need to specify the query set manually. We just specify the method here. Okay, so it works the exact same as the note list create, but this time there's nothing special we need to do. We just specify, okay, here are the valid notes that you could delete. And then what we'll actually do, is we'll specify a note we want to delete, and it will automatically delete it for us if we're authenticated, which is what we need to be. So now that we have these views, what we need to do is we need to set up some URLs for them. But this time I'm going to set up the URLs in this API folder. So I'm going to make a new file called urls.py. And inside urls.py, I'm going to say URL patterns is equal to an empty list. Now here we need to write the different URL patterns, and we'll actually forward URLs from the main application to here. So at the top of my code, I'm going to say from Django.urls import path. I'm then going to say from import views. Now inside URL patterns, I'm going to specify two paths. The first path will be for viewing or creating our notes. So we're just going to say notes slash, and this is going to go to the views dot, and this is going to be the note list create dot as view. We are then going to have the name equal to the note dash list. We're then going to have another path, and inside this path, we're going to say notes slash delete slash, and then this is going to be int :pk, which stands for primary key. And then this is going to be views.noteDelete.asView, and the name can be delete note. Okay, so now we have our URLs, here for the notes. Okay, so for creating and listing and for deleting. Now what we need to do is link the URLs from our main URLs file into this file. So we're going to go to urls.py within our backend, which is where we wrote the URLs before. And we're going to make a link so that we forward specific URLs over to this file where they're then handled from this app. So the way we do that is we specify a path, and inside the path, we're going to say API slash, and then we're going to include, and this is going to be the API.urls. Now, when we do that, what we're saying is, okay, whenever we go to something that has API slash, and it wasn't one of the ones above, we're going to take the remainder of the path, so what comes after the slash, and we're going to forward that to this file, api.urls, which is right here. Now inside of here, we'll parse the rest of the path, and if it matches anything here, we'll handle it and we'll go to the views that we wrote within this app. Now you may be asking yourself, why didn't we write the create user view in this same manner, right? Like inside of URL patterns. Well, we could have done that here inside of the app, but I wanted to keep all of the different routes related to our authentication and registration in the same place. So that's why I did it the way that I did it here. There's all different types of ways to link URLs, but I wanted to kind of show you both of them. So that's why we're doing that. Okay, so that's really going to wrap up most of the backend code, but obviously we want to check if this is working. So let's go ahead and run our code. But before we do that, we need to make a migration to our database because we've made a major change to the data model. So we're going to say Python manage.py make migrations. Okay, so you can see that it says we've now made a new migration, which is creating the model note. We now need to actually migrate. So let's go ahead and migrate, and you'll see that this works. Okay, now we're going to run our code. So Python manage.py run server, and we're going to test this out. So let's open up this view. Okay, so I need to actually go over here, and I guess we already have it open. So let's just refresh. Okay, continue, that's fine. And let's go and get our token. So we're going to go to /token here. Let me pass in some credentials so I get a token. Okay, so I have a token. I'm going to copy the access token. I'm now going to go to /API/notes. So you'll notice here that we're getting this error saying authentication credentials were not provided. Now this is actually good. It means this is working properly. And the reason it's working is because we didn't actually pass the token when we sent the request to this root in order to view the different notes. Now, we're not going to be able to pass that token without doing some things that are a little bit more advanced. So what we're actually going to do is just write the front end, and you'll see in the front end how we pass that token and actually are able to create the notes. For now, just trust me, this does work. If you wanted to test it out, you could remove the authentication. So if we go here, you could go to, what is it, views.py, and you could just remove this and make it to allow any instead. Then you would be able to access that root. The issue is, though, that you wouldn't have a user because you wouldn't be passing the correct access token. So just bear with me here, guys. That's going to wrap up the back end. Now what we're going to do is go over and write the front end. All right, so now we are moving on and we are working on the front end. Now this is going to be in React. So what I've done is I've just opened up that same directory that we were in before, but I've got into the base directory, so I'm no longer in that backend directory. Now what we're going to do is use Vite to create a new React project. To do that, I'm going to do npm create. This is going to be Vite at latest, and then frontend -- templates React. Now this is going to create a front end directory, which is going to have React installed. So let's go ahead and hit enter, and that should make it for us. Let's go yes, let's install that. And now we need to install a few different packages. So let's go to cd frontend, and we're going to install the various packages that we need. So we're going to type npm install, and we're going to install Axios for using our network requests. We're going to install React, router, DOM, and then we're going to install JWT decode. These are the three packages that we need here. So let's install all three of those. Let's give those a second. And once they're finished, I'll be right back. All right, so I realized that I typed in the wrong thing for React router DOM. So let's fix that. I'm not sure how I made that mistake there, but it says it can't find, what is it, React DOM? Yeah, that's because that's not a package. We need React router DOM. So let's fix that and install, and hopefully we'll be good now. Okay, looks like we are good to go. So now we can go inside of our front end directory and we can start creating some different files. Now I'm not gonna lie to you, there is a fair amount of code here, but as always, I'm gonna walk through it step by step. And if you wanna copy anything, you can just do that from the GitHub repository, which is linked in the description. Okay, so what we're gonna do is go inside of src here, and we're just gonna start organizing this directory a little bit. First of all, we're gonna delete these CSS files. So let's get rid of those because we don't need them. We're going to go into assets. That's actually fine there. We'll go into app.jsx, and we'll just remove everything inside of the body here of this component. And we'll get rid of this. Okay. And we'll get rid of all three of those imports and the import to app.css. We're just going to import React from React here. Okay. Just so we don't get any errors. All right. Now we'll go into main.jsx. We're going to remove the import to index.css because we don't need that. And we're going to create a few directories in here where we'll organize our code. Now the first directory is going to be pages. The next directory is going to be styles. And the last one is going to be components. Okay, so this is where we're going to organize all of our different code. Now we're going to create a few other files here. We're going to make a constants, if we can spell this correctly, .js, and we're going to make an API.js. We're also going to make an environment variable file inside of the front end directory. So we're going to type .env like that. Okay, so we have our .env. We then have our new directories, components, pages, and styles. We have our constants file, and we have our API.js file. Now let's go into constants to start. I just need to define a few constants that we'll use inside of API. So let's write these constants out. We're going to say export const, and this is going to be access underscore token. And this is just simply going to be equal to access. And then we're going to say export const, and this is going to be refresh underscore token. And this is going to be equal to refresh. Now, the reason why I'm putting these here is that we're going to use local storage to store the access token and the refresh token in our browser. And I want to have a key that I can use to access in my local storage. And that's what this key is going to be. So I'm going to use these constants here to access the access token and the refresh token. Okay, so now that we have that, we're going to go inside of api.js. I just want to hook up the more complex stuff to start, and then we can start writing all of the components. Now, the idea in this api.js file is that what I'm going to do is I'm going to write something known as an interceptor. Now, an interceptor will essentially intercept any request that we're going to send, and it will automatically add the correct headers so that we don't need to manually write it a bunch of different times repetitively in our code. Now, we're going to be using something known as Axios. Axios is a really clean way to send network requests that's pretty easy to use. So we're going to set up something called an Axios interceptor, where anytime we send a request, it's going to check if we have an access token. And if we do, it will automatically add it to that request. So we don't need to think about it once we write this code once. So we're going to say import Axios from Axios. Okay. We're then going to say import the access token from our constants. Now what we're going to do is we're going to get the API. So we're going to say const API is equal to axios.create. And inside of create, we're going to pass an object. And the object is going to specify the base URL, which is going to be equal to import.meta.env.vite_API_URL. Okay, now this might seem confusing, but what this allows us to do is import anything that's specified inside an environment variable file. Now, if we want to have an environment variable loaded inside of our, JavaScript code here, our React code, it needs to start with Vite. So the idea here is that we're going to have this in an environment variable so that it's really easy for us to load and change what the URL should be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my .env file, and inside of here, I'm going to specify that same thing. So Vite_API_URL, and we're just going to make this equal to http://localhost:8000. Okay, now we can change that later if we need to, but this should be the URL of our backend server. Obviously, it's not running right now, but when we start running it, then this will be the correct one. Okay, so since that's in there, this is how you import that environment variable. Import.meta.env.vite_API_URL, and we're specifying that as the base URL. So when I start using this API here, all I need to do is specify the path I want to access. I don't need to specify the base URL. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say api.interceptors, and this is going to be .request.use. Now inside of here, it's going to take a function. So we're going to write an arrow function like so. Now inside of this function, we're going to accept the config, and what we're going to do is look in our local storage and see if we have an access token. If we do, we're going to add that as an authorization header to our request. Otherwise, there's nothing that we need to do because we don't have a header. So I'm going to say const token is equal to local storage dot get item, and I'm going to try to get the item with the key access token. We'll set this later, but for now, we're just going to try to get it. We're going to say if we have a token, then what we'll do is say config.headers.authorization is equal to, and then we're going to use backticks here, and we're going to say bearer, and then we're going to embed the token like so. Now this is how you pass a JWT access token. You simply create an authorization header, which can automatically be handled for us by Axios, which is why we're using it, and it needs to start with bearer, then you have a space, and then you have what the actual token is. Now this is how you embed a string inside of another string, or yeah, I guess that's what we're doing, right? We use backticks, and then we can embed a variable here inside of the string. Okay, so that is if this is successful, and then we need to return config. Now we're just gonna have another function here, which is called error. And if there's an error, all we're gonna do is say return promise.reject, and we're gonna reject with the error. Okay, now don't worry about this too much, this error function. The main thing that we want to be looking at here is adding this authorization header that's automatically going to happen in all our requests. So now what we're going to do is say export default API. So we're going to export this object that we've just added this interceptor on. And from now on, we're actually going to use this API object rather than using Axios by default to send all of our different requests. So the authorization token will automatically be added for us. Okay, so now that we've done that, we actually need a way to get our token, right? And also to protect our different routes on the front end as well as on the back end. Now, the order I'm going to do this might seem a little bit weird, but you just need to bear with me because there's a lot of code that needs to be written before any of this will actually be testable because of the security that we have on our backend. So I'm going to go inside of my components here. I'm going to make a new component called protectedroute.jsx. Okay. Now this is going to represent a wrapper for a protected route. And the idea is if we wrap something in protected route, then we need to have an authorization token before we'll be able to actually access this route. So what I'm going to do is the following. I'm going to say import navigate from React router DOM. I'm then going to import the JWT decode from, and this is going to be JWT-decode. I'm then going to import API from, and this is going to be //API. Okay, and I'm going to import the refresh token and the access token from my constants. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my function and I'm going to say function protected route. And inside of here, we're going to take in children. Now this is what will be wrapped. And then for our protected route, we're going to do a few different things here. Now the basic idea is we need to check if we are authorized before we allow someone to access this route. Otherwise, we just need to redirect them and tell them they need to log in before they can view this. Now, theoretically, someone could bypass this because it's all front-end code, but the concept is that I don't want to allow someone to go to a route on the front end they shouldn't be able to access until they've logged in. So I'm writing my own kind of custom front-end protection here just to make this a little bit cleaner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a const here, and I'm going to say this is authorized, and then set is authorized. If we could spell this correctly, and this is going to be equal to use state, which we're going to import from React, and by default this is going to be null. Okay, then what we're going to do is we're going to write two functions. The first function is going to be refresh token, okay, which is going to be an async function. All right, and what this is going to do is refresh the access token for us automatically. We're then going to have an auth function, which is also going to be async, which is going to check if we need to refresh the token or if we are good to go. Okay, so down here, before I implement these functions, I'm just going to say something where I say if is authorized is equal to null. Then what I'm going to do is return a div, and this div is just going to say loading ... The reason for this is that until this has some state that's not null, I'm loading and I'm just checking the tokens or I'm potentially refreshing them. Okay, otherwise I'm going to return is authorized ? So if we are authorized, so if that's true, then we're going to return whatever the children were that we wrapped. Otherwise, we're going to return a component called navigate, and this is going to go to equals, and it's going to go to the login route. So to/login. Now this is a route, or this is a component, sorry, that we can use from React router DOM. As soon as this is rendered, it's just going to automatically navigate us to the login page. I know we haven't implemented all of the routing yet, but this is what it will do once we implement the routing. Then down here, I'm going to say export default, and this is going to be the protected route. Okay, so we're going to go inside of our auth function now. And the idea inside of auth is to first look at our access token, see if we have one, and if we have one, check if it's expired or not. Now, if it's expired, we want to just automatically refresh the token so that the user doesn't have to worry about anything and it just happens by itself in the background. That's what this function will do. Now, if we cannot refresh the token or it's expired, then what we'll do is just say, hey, no, you're not authorized, and you need to log in again by going to that login route. So the first thing we're going to check is if you have the token. So we're going to say const token is equal to local storage.getItem, and we're going to access the item with the access token. We're then going to say if not token, then what we'll do is we'll say set is authorized to false, and we will return. Okay. Now, if we do have the token, then what we can do is decode the token and we can get what the expiration date is. So to do that, we can say const decoded is equal to JWT code, and then take in the token. Now this is just automatically going to decode it for us and give us access to the value and the expiration date. So I'm going to say const token expiration is equal to decoded.exp, okay, which stands for expiration. I'm now going to get today's date. I'm going to say const now is equal to date.now, and I'm going to divide this by 1,000 so I get the date in seconds, not in milliseconds. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if the token expiration is less than now, which would mean it's already expired, I'm going to say await refresh token. Otherwise, I'm going to say set is authorized, and this is going to be true. Now, the reason I can set it equal to true is because if the token is not yet expired, that means that it's valid, and we're good to just simply say that, yes, it's authorized, we're good to go. Okay? Now what we'll do is we'll go write the refresh token, and then we actually need to call these functions. So inside of refresh token, we're going to say const refresh token is equal to local storage dot get item, and we're going to get the refresh token. I'm then going to do a try catch block here. So let's write the catch to start. So we're going to catch some error, and we'll just say set is authorized and then false, and we can just console.log the error here. Okay, now inside of the try, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send a request to my backend with my refresh token to get a new access token. So I'm going to say const res, standing for response, is equal to await API dot post, and I'm going to post to /API /token /refresh. Don't forget the trailing slash, otherwise this won't work. And then as the payload, I'm going to pass refresh equal to my refresh token. Now let's just format this so it's a little bit easier to read. Okay, so here what we're doing, right, is we're saying let's get the refresh token, and then we're going to try to send a response to this root with the refresh token, which should give us a new access token. So what we'll do here now is we'll say if res.status is equal to 200, meaning it was successful, we're going to say local storage dot set item. We're going to set the new access token to be equal to the res.data.access. Okay, because that's what's going to contain the access token. We're then going to say set is authorized to true. Otherwise, we're going to say set is authorized to false. Okay, so that's how the refresh token function works. We get the refresh token, we send it to the backend. Notice we're using API.post. When I do that, it's automatically going to handle the base URL for me. So I just need to pass, if we go back here, the root that I want to access, which is this. I pass my refresh token. If the response status code is 200, that means it's successful and I did get back an access token. So I will change, or I will set, the new access token as the access token in local storage, so I can use it when I now send requests. Then I set is authorized to true. Otherwise, I set it to false because for some reason there was an error here and we didn't get a new access token. Okay, last thing we need to do here is we're going to write a use effect. So we're going to say const, actually we're going to say use effect up here to import that. And we're going to say use effect like this. We're going to implement our function. And all we're going to do is we're going to say auth. So we're going to call this function. And we're just going to catch in case there's any errors. So we're going to say auth.catch. And if there is an error, we're going to say set is authorized to false. Okay, so the idea is as soon as we load a protected root, we're going to try to do this, right? Where we call the auth function, we see if we have a token. If we do have a token and it's not expired, we can simply set authorized to true. If it is expired, we need to refresh the token. So we'll wait for that to happen. And then as soon as the token is refreshed and we're authorized, we'll be able to access that root. If we are not able to access the root or we're unauthorized, then we're going to return the navigate component back to login. Okay, let's zoom out a bit so you can kind of read some of it. I'll just slowly scroll through it. Of course, you can also copy this directly from the GitHub. Okay, so that is our protected root component. Now what we're going to do is we're going to stub some pages that we're going to need, and we're going to set up the navigation for our application. So I'm going to make a few different components. I'm going to say login.jsx. I'm going to say register .jsx. I'm going to say home. So let's do this. .jsx. What else do we need? And I'm going to do not found .jsx. Okay. Now inside of each of these, I'm just going to stub a component. So I'm going to say const home. Let's zoom in a bit. Okay. Or actually, let's just make it function. Let's say function home like that. And then we will export default home. And from home, we can just return some div that says home. Let's copy that and let's go into login and let's just change home here to be login. Okay, obviously we're going to fill in these components later, but I just need to have some of them right now for my navigation. For this one, it'll be not found. So this is like a 404 page. Okay, so we're going to do not found and then not found. And then lastly, register. This is going to say register, register, and register. Okay, so now that we have our 4 pages, let me make this bigger so we can see it and close all of these. What we're going to do is we're going to go to our app.jsx and we're going to write the navigation essentially. So how we go between the different pages using React Router DOM. So let's start importing a few things we need. Again, the idea is that this is the root of our application and we want to be able to navigate between different pages by going to a different address in the URL bar. So that's what I'm going to show you how to implement. So I'm going to say import the browser router, import routes, and import navigation from React Router DOM. I am then going to import the login component from, this is going to be /, and this is going to be pages/login. We are then going to import the register component from ./pages/register. I'm then going to import the home component from the same thing, pages/home, and we're going to import the not found component from ./pages/not found. Okay, we also need to import the protected root. So we're going to say import protected root from ./components/protected root. Okay, now we're going to write 2 very simple functions, one for logging us out. So I'm going to say function logout, and all logout is going to do is as soon as we call it, it's going to say local storage.clear. So as soon as we log out, we're going to clear our refresh token and our access token. And we're just going to return a navigate. So let's do this. And this is going to be 2. So let's write 2 equals /login. Okay. And navigate, we need to import that. So do we have that imported? Sorry, this needs to be navigate, not navigation. Okay, so that is our logout function. And then we're going to import one more function or write one more function. And this is going to be register and logout. Okay. And what this is going to do is it is going to say local storage.clear. Then this is going to return simply the register component. Now, the reason why I'm writing this is that if someone is registering, I first want to clear the local storage so that I don't end up submitting access tokens to the register root where I could potentially get an error. So we just need to make sure that when we are registering, we first clear the local storage so we don't have any old access tokens lingering around. I know it seems a bit strange, but it's just something that we need to do in order for this to work properly. Okay. Now what we want to do is we want to set up this app component so that we can navigate between our different pages. So to do that, we're going to return the browser router. Okay, this is a component from React Router DOM. Now inside of here, we need to specify routes. So we're going to say routes. And inside of here, we can put all of our different routes that we want to navigate between. So let's begin by specifying the home route. So we're going to say route. This is going to be a self-contained component. And inside of here, we're going to say the path is equal to this. So just the standard path. If you go to just the normal path, this is where I'll bring it to you. And the element that we want to render here is going to be the following. Now this is going to be the protected root. And then inside of the protected root, we are going to render home. So the point is that you cannot access the home component unless you have the access token and it's valid, because you shouldn't be able to access that because home is for people that are logged in and authenticated. So that's how this works, right? We're wrapping the component that we want to be protected with protected root, and you can use protected root for any component that you want. So now we're going to do another root, and let's end it like this. The path for this one this time will be /login. And this element that we're going to render is going to be the login page. Okay, now that's not protected. You can go to that no matter what. Now let's copy this and do the same thing for register. Okay, but the element we're going to go to this time is going to be the component we wrote. So register and log out, right? The one that's going to log us out first by removing the tokens. And then we're going to have another root. This is going to be path equal to, and we're just going to put an asterisk. And if you go to any other path, we're going to render the element, which is equal to the not found root, which is going to be like a 404 page. Okay. So what we're doing is we're looking first, starting at the very first root. So we're saying, okay, is it the normal path? If it is, go to home. If it's login, go to login. If it's register, go to register. If it is anything else, go to the 404 not found page. Okay. That's going to handle all of our routing. Now we can actually test if this routing is working. So to do that, we're going to bring up our code here. Notice we're inside of the front end directory, and we're going to type npm. And actually, I believe we are going to need to install. Okay, no, actually that seemed to work, so that's fine. And then we're going to type npm run dev. Now, when we type npm run dev, that's going to run the development server for us. What we can do now is we can open it up. Let me just bring it over to the other page. And you'll see that we go to login by default. If I try to go to home, notice it's redirecting me to login because it is a protected root and we don't have our access tokens. Now let's see what happens if we go to register, brings us to register. And if we go to something like some random string, it brings us to not found. Okay, so that's working. So let's go ahead and shut this down and start writing some more of our components. Okay, so first component that I think is pretty easy to get out of the way is the 404 or the not found component. So let's write that one. So for this, all we can do in here is just remove that, and we can go with an h1 tag. And we could say 404 not found, and then we can go with AP and we can say the page you're looking for does not exist. Okay, like that. So that's fine. And maybe we'll do doesn't exist. Okay, so that's good for the not found page. Next, what I actually want to write is I want to write a generic form that can be used by our register and by our login page. And I also realized here that we didn't implement the logout route, so let's quickly do that. So we're just going to write another one here and just change this to say logout, and we'll go to logout. Okay, so sorry, just add that one. I just forgot that right there. Okay, so as I was saying, what I want to do is I want to make a form. This form will just collect a username or password and then submit it to either the register route or to the login route. Now, we can just write one form and we can just kind of make it a bit dynamic so it works for both registering and logging in, because for our registration, it's the exact same process as logging in, right? Just a username and password. It'll be the same for both. So what I'm going to do is go to components and I'm going to make a form.jsx. So inside of here, let's import a few things that we need. We're going to say import use state from React. We're going to say import API from .. API. I'm going to say import, and this is going to be use navigate from React router DOM. Okay, this is a hook that we can use to actually access the navigation from code. I then am going to import the access token. Okay, come on, give it to me. And the refresh token from our constants. And I am going to, actually for now, that's it. Okay, we're now going to write a function. This is a form, and we're going to take in two props. The props that we're going to take in are our root and our method. Okay, now the root is the route that we want to go to when we submit the form. So it could be the token route or it could be the register route. And the method is just telling us, okay, are we registering or are we logging in? The idea is this form will work again for both logging in and registering, and this is the dynamic props that we'll pass to specify what it should be used for. So in terms of the state, we're going to need to store the username and the password that the user is typing in. So we're going to say const username, comma, set username is equal to use state, and this will be an empty string. We're then going to say const password, and then set password is equal to use state, and this will be an empty string. And then we'll do one more piece of state to just keep track of if we're loading or not. So we're going to say const loading, set loading is equal to use state, and this will be false to start. We're then going to say const navigate is equal to use navigate, and we'll call that hook. Okay, now what we want to do is just write a basic form. So we're going to say return, and we're going to return a form. Now the form is going to have on submit, okay, and this is going to call a function, and the function it's going to call is handle submit. So we can stub that function right now. We can say const handle submit is equal to a function, and inside of here we're going to take in e, and we're going to say e dot prevent default. Now what this will do is prevent us from actually submitting the form, and it will kind of remove the default behavior, so we won't reload the page because we don't want to reload the page here when we're doing that. Okay, so now that we've made the form, I'm just going to add a class to this because we're going to style it in a second. So I'm going to say class name is the form container, and then inside the form we'll write our different elements. So first things first, we're going to write an h1 tag, and we're actually going to look at what the method is that's passed as the prop. Now we're going to say if the method is equal to login, then we're just going to render login as the text inside of here. Otherwise, we're going to render register, sorry. Okay, so this is just giving us the name. And in fact, what we can do just to make this a little bit cleaner is we can say const name is equal to, and we can copy this and paste this here, and then we can just render the name inside of here. So the idea is we're just getting the name that we should put for the title of the form, okay? So if it's login, then do login, otherwise do register. So method will be either equal to login or register. Okay, now we're gonna have some input fields for the username and the password. So we're gonna say input, okay? And for the first input, we'll specify the class name equal to, and this can be the form dash input. Then we can do type is equal to text. We can do the value is equal to username, and on change is equal to, and then we're going to take in a function here, and this is going to be e, and then set username. So let's spell that correctly, and this is going to be e dot target dot value. Okay, lastly we'll have a placeholder, and this will be equal to username. Okay, so this is one of our input fields. Again, form input, type text, value username. So this means that anytime we make a change here, we take in the variable e. We're then saying set username, and then whatever we typed, we're just going to adjust and set that in the state so that we'll be able to access that when we actually submit the form. Now we're going to copy this, and we'll just do a similar thing here for the password. So we're going to change this from type text to type password. We're going to change the value to be password. We're going to change set username to be set password, and we're going to change the placeholder to be password. Okay, almost done. Last thing we want to do now is add the button because we need a button to submit. So for the class name of this button, it will just be the form dash button, and the type of this will be submit. And then inside of the button, we're just going to put the name that we have from up here. So it'll either say login or register, depending on the method that we pass to this form. Okay, we can zoom out a little bit so it's a bit easier to read. And that's it for the actual JSX, or what do you call it, what we're rendering on the screen. Let me just format this. And now let's write our handle submit method. So when we submit the form, the first thing we'll do is we'll set loading equal to true. Okay, let's zoom in so we can see this a bit. And then after that, we're going to attempt to send a request to whatever root it is that this form is representing. So we're either going to try to log in or we're going to try to register. So what we'll do is we'll set up a try catch because this could fail. Okay, and we're going to make this an async function as well. Okay, so we're going to catch error. If we have an error, we're just going to alert what the error is. So it'll just show it on screen. And then we're going to add a finally block, and we're going to say set loading false. So no matter what happens, we're going to try to send the request. If there's an error, we'll catch it. And whether it worked or it didn't work, we're just going to set loading equal to false, because eventually we'll have a loading indicator here, and we want to obviously like turn that off, right? Now let me just fix this a little bit. Okay, so inside of our try, we're going to send a request. So to send the request, we're going to say const res is equal to await API dot post, and we're going to post to the root that was passed into the form. We then are going to pass a username and a password. So this is it. It's going to use the API that we wrote. It's going to send a post request to whatever the root is, pass the username and password. We're going to wait until we get that back, and we're going to check the following. We're going to say if method is equal to login, then what we're going to do is say local storage dot set item, and we're going to set the access token to the res.data.access. And we're going to say local storage dot set item, and we're going to set the refresh token to be res.data.refresh. Okay, so the idea is we're going to send this request. If an error occurs, it'll be handled here in the catch. If there's no error that occurs, then we're going to check if the method was login. If it was, that means that we need to get the access token and the refresh token, and we need to set them. Okay, then we are going to navigate to the slash login, or sorry, not to the slash login, to the slash page. So we're going to use the navigate function that we have here and just navigate to home, so we'll be able to view our notes, which you'll see in a second. Otherwise, we are going to navigate to slash login. The reason for this is that if it wasn't login, it must have been register. If it was register, there's no tokens that we need to set. In order to get the tokens, we actually need to log in with our new registered account. Okay, so that's our form. Again, we can kind of zoom out a little bit so you can read it a little bit better. Now there's some more things that we'll do here later on, but for now, I just want to apply the styling, and then I want to actually go to these elements and test out and see if they're working. So for the styling, I'm going to make a new style sheet here in styles, and I'm going to call this form.css. Now what I'm going to do is just copy in the styles. I'm not going to write them out because I think that's kind of a waste of time. So I'm going to paste in all of the styles here. If you want these styles, you can simply have them from the GitHub repository that is linked in the description. Okay, so you can just go find them from the form.css file and just paste them in your own file, or you can just copy the entire file, right? Whatever you want to do. Anyways, I've written them in here. In order for these styles to be applied though, we do need to import that file. So we're going to say import /styles/form.css. Okay, just so that we'll have some nice styling. Last thing we need to do is we need to export this component. So we're going to say export default form. And now that we have exported the form, we can start using it. So now that we have the form component, we're going to use that from the login and from the register component. And it's going to be pretty straightforward, but all we'll do from login here is we'll start by importing the form. So we're going to say import form from dot slash, or dot slash, if we can do 2 dots, components slash form. And then rather than returning this div, we're just going to return the form component, but we're going to pass 2 props to it. Now, when we're logging in, or sorry, when we're registering, the route that we want to go to is API/user/register. Again, make sure you have that trailing slash. Then the method is going to be equal to register. Okay. So that's it. That's all we need to do. We're just setting the route that we want to send the request to, and we're specifying the name or the method, which is register. Now we can copy this same thing, and we can go to login. And for login, we need to import the form again. So we're going to say import, let's zoom in, form from dot slash component slash form. This time for login, the route is going to be API/token/, and the method is going to be to log in. Okay, so now we should be using this for both the login and the register route, and we can check if we are by clearing and going to npm run dev. So now if we open this up, let me just bring this over so we can see it because it keeps opening on my other screen. You see that we have a login field, and if I go to /register, we have the register form. Now the main thing to check here is if the token is actually going to be working. However, before we can do that, we need to make sure that the backend is running. So what I want to do now is I want to split my terminal here. I want to cd into the backend directory, and I want to run my app. So I'm going to say Python manage.py run server. All you need to do here is get in the backend directory and just run the server like you normally would. Okay. So we're going to run this now, and let's just check where it's running, right? So HTTP 1.7.0.0.1:8000. I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to go to my environment variable, and I'm just going to paste it inside of here, just so it's exactly what we had before. And actually, I think I got to remove that trailing slash, otherwise we might get an error. Okay, I'm just going to shut down my Vite server, and I'm just going to rerun it to make sure it reloads the environment variable. And now I have my backend running and my front end. And technically, we should be sending requests now to the backend. So let's test that out. So what I'm going to do from register is I'm going to say new_user, and let's go with a password like 12345. And I'm just going to open up the inspect window here in my console so I can see what's happening. So let's click on register, and notice that it redirected me to log in. Now, if we want to see if that's working, we can go to our backend, and we'll see that a post request was actually sent here, and even shows us what the options were. Username, new user, password here. I don't know if maybe I printed that out or something. I'm not sure if that's supposed to show us. Regardless, you can see the post was successful with 201. It immediately redirected us to login. So now I can try to log in. So I'm going to go new user, and then 12345, log in, and notice it brings me to home. So I can access home even though it's a protected root because now I have my access token. And if we go back here and we look, where is it? We have a post to token, and you can see we have a status code of 200 working successfully. Okay, so we're able to communicate, no CORS errors, everything is good. And let's see what happens. Actually, I guess there's not much more that I can check. I mean, I can go to login. Okay, it brings me there, and I can go back to home because I still have the access token. But you'll notice now, if I go to /logout, it's going to redirect me to login. And if I try to go back to home, it doesn't let me go there because I'm no longer authorized because I've logged out. So I would need to log in again, new_user. Okay. And then it will bring me to home, and I'm good to go. All right. So there you go. We're making really, really good progress now. Now that we've done that, we want to start writing the home page so we can actually start making some notes and our application can actually do something. So we're able to log in, we're able to register, the form is built. I would say the hard part is done, and now we need to start actually interacting with our notes. So that's going to involve writing some code inside of the home page here, so let's start doing that. So from our home page, what we want to be able to do here is view all of the notes that we have, and then create new notes and delete notes. So let's go through those operations one at a time. We're going to start by importing a few things. So I'm going to say import. Then we're going to import use state and use effects from React. Okay, and we're going to import our API from /API. Okay, now inside of home, let's start with the state that we need. So we're going to need to keep track of all of the notes that we have that we've already grabbed from the server, because the first thing we'll do when we load this page is we'll send an authorized request to get all of the notes that we've created. So let's do that first. We're going to say const notes set notes is equal to use state, and this will be an empty array. We then need some state for the form that will be on this page that allows us to create a new note. Now I'm going to do it all in this component. We could put it in a separate component if we wanted it to be cleaner, but in this case, I'm just going to have some state for the content and for the title of my note. So I'm going to say const content set content is equal to use state. This will be an empty string. I'm then going to say const, and this is going to be title set title is equal to use state, and this is going to be an empty string. And now what we're going to do is write a few different functions that will send some requests. So I am going to write all of the HTML obviously in a second, but I want to show you how we send the request to, for example, get all of the notes that this user has written. So we're going to write a function called get notes. Now this can be written like this, and what this is going to do is say API.get, and we're just going to call the /API /notes root. Notice I have my trailing slash. Okay, now if you weren't sure how you would figure out what this root is, in the backend, remember if we go to API and URLs, we have these different roots that we've written, right? We have the notes root and we have notes /delete. Now, the reason I'm prefixing this with API is because the way that we forwarded the URLs, if we go back into backend here, is anything that had API and wasn't one of these routes up here got forwarded to the other API routes that we have here. So that's why I know that that's the correct route. Hopefully that's helpful, but the idea is we've written all of these paths in our backend, and now we're going to access them from our front end. Okay, so I have api.get /API/notes/ that's going to give me all the notes this user has written. So I'm going to have a .then, and I'm going to say res, and I'm going to return my res.data. I'm then going to have another .then, and inside of here, I'm going to have my data, and I'm going to say set notes equal to whatever the data is. Now let me just format this so it looks a little bit nicer. Okay, then we're going to have a .catch in case there's an error. And if there is an error, we're just going to alert the error on screen. Okay, and let me format this so that we get it looking nicer. Okay, so there we go. That's our get note function that will get all of the notes for us. And really this should be get notes. So what we can do is we can write a use effect. And this use effect can simply call the get notes function, as soon as we visit this page. And then what we can do is inside of the .then, we can just console.log what the notes are. So console.log, and this will be the data, just so that we can see what it is when we load this component. Okay, so before we go much further, let's actually just see if this request works. So let's open up our terminal here. Let's go back to our front end and let's refresh, and notice that you see we get an empty list here, okay? So we're getting the empty list. The reason why we're getting the empty list is because, well, there's no nodes that we've created. And if we go back here, you can see that it's sending the request to /API/notes. Perfect. Okay, so let's bring that down, and then let's continue writing our code. So now that we have get notes, let's have a way to delete notes and to create notes. Now to delete a note, we're going to say const delete note, but we need to take in the ID of the note that we want to delete. Then what we'll do is we'll say API.delete, because the request is delete this time. We're going to use some backticks, and we're going to say /API/notes/delete/ and then we're going to pass inside of here the ID of the note that we want to remove. We're then going to say .then, and we're going to get the response, and we're going to check the status code of the response. So we're going to say if res.status is equal to 204, which means we successfully deleted it. Then we're going to have an alert, and we'll say note was deleted. Okay. Otherwise, we're going to say alert, and then failed. If we do this, failed to delete note, like that. Okay. Then we're going to have a .catch, and for the .catch, we're going to catch an error, and we're going to alert whatever that error is on screen. And then I'm just going to call the get notes function. This is not the most optimal way to do this, but the idea is if we just deleted a note, then it means that our notes have changed. So I want to show that update on the screen. So we'll just call get notes again, and then that will actually update the screen by removing the notes when we receive the new notes from our backend. Really what we should be doing is on the front end, just removing it from this list, but I don't want to write that JavaScript to do the removal, so we're just going to do it like this. Okay, so I'm just going to format this again so it's a little bit easier to read. And now we need to write our last function before we get into the HTML, which is creating our notes. So to create our notes, we're going to say const create note, and we're going to take in some value e, because this is going to come from a form, and we're going to say e.prevent and then default. Okay, we're then going to say API.post, and we're going to post to /API/notes. Okay, so the same one that we used to get our results, but this time we're not using get, we're using post. And what we'll do is we'll pass the content and the title of the note we want to create. Then similarly to before, we're going to take in the response here in the .then, and we're going to say if the response.status is equal to 201, which means we created the note. We're going to say alert, and then note, if we can do this, created. Okay. Otherwise, there was an error, so we're going to say alert, and then failed to make note. Okay. Then we need a dot catch, same thing. If we have an error, so we'll say error like this, then we are going to alert the error. And then lastly, we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna say get notes like that. Okay, and let's zoom back in and format. And now we have our create note function. Okay, so we have create note, delete note, and get notes. Now we need to write the HTML. Okay, so for our HTML, we kind of have two main components here. The first part is just displaying all of our notes, and the second part is going to be a bit of a form to create a note. So for displaying our notes, we'll just make a div here, and we're going to say h2 and then notes. And then inside of here, we're actually going to render all of our notes. However, I'm going to write a separate component that will display the notes. So for right now, we're just going to leave that empty. We're now going to come down here though, and we're going to make a form, and this form is create a note. Okay, so we're going to write a form, and this needs to be in lowercase. The form is going to have an onSubmit, and the onSubmit is going to be equal to the create note function. Now inside of the form, we're going to write our different elements. So we're going to have a label. This is going to be HTML4 equal to the title. And this is going to say title colon. We're then going to have a break line. And we're going to have an input field. For the input, we're going to say type is equal to text. We're going to say the ID is equal to the title. We're going to say the name is equal to the title. And we're going to say required. And then on change is going to be equal to, and this is going to be E, and then set like this, set title, and then E dot target dot value. Don't worry, I'm going to save it so we can actually see what it looks like. Okay, so this is the input. Type equals text, ID title, name title. On change, we'll also set the value equal to the title. Perfect. Okay, so that's the first part. Now we need the same thing, but for the content. So I'm just going to copy this and paste this down here and change this to say content. And then this will say content. And then we're going to use a text area this time, so it's a little bit larger. So we're going to say text area. And inside of text area, we're going to say ID is equal to content. We're going to say name is equal to content. We're going to say required. We're going to say value is equal to content, and we're going to say on change is equal to, and then this is going to be a function where we take in E. Let's save this, or actually is this going to work right now? Okay, let's go there. So it's going to be a function E, and then this is going to be set content E dot target dot value. Okay, I know this a lot. We're almost done. We're now going to have another break line. And then beneath this, we're going to have an input. And this is going to be type equal to submit. And we'll say the value is equal to submit. Okay. And let's format it. Nice. Okay. Zoom out a bit so we can read it a bit easier. You can see that what we're returning here is a big div. Inside the div, we have a first part, which will display all of our notes in. And then we have a second part here where we are going to create a note. When we submit the form, it's going to call the create note function, which is going to pass the title as well as the content. Okay. Last thing. Yeah. Value content. Okay. So that's good. All right. So I think that's going to complete the homepage other than displaying all of the notes. So let's test this out. Let's make sure our servers are currently running. Looks like they are. We'll come back here and you can see that we have kind of a sketchy little form here. We'll fix that in a second. But for now, let's see if we can make a new note. So we're going to say test note and then test content and submit. And it says the note was created. And if I refresh here, you can see now that we have a new note. Okay, so it says author is ID2, content, test content created at ID title. Perfect, that is working. Okay, now we did have an issue though, where when I created the note, it didn't update right away. So I just want to see why that was the case. I think it's because we need to put the get notes inside of the .then. Yes, that's going to make sense. So we'll put that inside of .then, and we're going to do that for all of the places where we create it. So we're going to take this and put it here. Okay, perfect. So that should fix that for us. And now we want to start displaying the different notes, and we also want to style this page a bit. We'll do the styling after. First, we're going to make a new component inside of the components directory called note.jsx. Okay, this is going to represent one single note, and we'll just use this to render all of our notes really easily. So we're going to say import React from React. We're then going to make a function called note. Now the note is just going to take in the note itself and a function which is on delete. And we're going to return some JSX here, or some HTML. So we're going to have a div. The class name of this is going to be the note container. Okay, we're then going to have a p tag. This is going to have a class name equal to the note title. This is going to be note dot title. We're going to have another p tag. This is going to say class name is equal to, and this is going to be the note and content. And then you guessed it, this is going to be the note dot content. We're then going to have another p tag, and this is going to be class name equal to the note date. And then what we're going to do is pass in a value here, which I'll put in a second. And then we're going to have a button, and this button is going to have a class name equal to delete button, and it's going to have an on click equal to, and we're going to call the on delete function. So we're going to have a function that calls on delete and passes the note.id. And then here, this will say delete. Okay, let's format this so we can read it. Nice. So what we're doing, right, is we're rendering the container. Inside of here, we're going to have the title, the content. We're going to put the date here, which I'm going to do in a second. And then we have the delete button, which will call the onDelete function that we pass as a prop with the ID of the note, which is what we'll need to actually delete the note. So that's why we wrap this with another function, so we can pass this argument here into the function. So now I'm just going to make a variable. I'm going to say const formatted date is equal to new date. And I'm going to take in the note.createdAt, and I'm just going to convert this to a local date string in enus. Now what this is going to do is just strip off all the parts that we don't need to see, like the time zone, and it's just going to tell us what the date was when we actually created this string. So it's just going to give us a nicely formatted date, essentially. I know I said that kind of backwards. It's just going to make the date look nicer. That's all it's doing. Now you can do all kinds of formatting for it, but that's fine for now. So we're going to pass the formatted date here where we were kind of missing that value. Now that we have this note component, we can use it inside of the home page. So to do that, where we have notes here, we're going to start rendering all of our note components. So to render our note components, we're going to render some code here, and we're going to say notes.map, and we're going to map each one of our notes, and we're going to show the note component. So we're going to say note. The note is going to be equal to the note. On delete is going to be equal to, and then this is going to be the delete note function. So it will call that with the ID. We're then going to say the key is equal to the note.id, just so we don't get that error that we so commonly see where it says, hey, we need a key on all of our dynamically rendered elements. So let's format this again, and there we go. Okay, so we're rendering note. However, we need to import note, so let's do that from the top of our program. We can say import note from /components/note. Okay, we're almost done here, so let's bring this up and let's test this now. So we're going to come here and refresh, and it gives it's an error here. Sorry, it says source components note.jsx does not provide exported named default. Okay, let's fix that error. So we're going to go back to note, and we need to export this. So we're going to say export default notes. All right, so let's go back to our front end, and we can see now that the note is appearing. If I refresh, it works, and I can delete it, and notice it goes away. Now let's add a little bit of styling here, and then that's going to pretty much wrap up the front end, and then we can move on to the deployment. Okay, so let's begin by styling the note. To do that, we'll just go to styles. We'll make a new one called note.css. And while we are here, excuse me, I will do home.css, and we're going to add a component called loading indicator. So I'm just going to add that while we're here. Okay, I'm going to go to note.css. I'm just going to copy in all of the code. Again, you can find this from the GitHub repository. I don't like just writing a bunch of CSS in a video. I find it's not very useful. Okay, so that's for note. For home, let's copy in this. Okay, again, all of this available from the GitHub. And then loading indicator, let me copy in this code, paste it, and format it. Okay, so that is that for the styles. Now we need to import it. So from home.jsx, we're going to import our styles. So we're going to import /styles/home.css. Now let's go to the same thing for our, what is this, notes? Okay, and we'll import note.css. Okay, let's go back here now, and you can see that looks quite a bit nicer. And now we can do, hey, what is up? Submit that, note created, and you see the note pops up. We have our date, delete button, etc. Okay, last thing to do is add a loading indicator. So for example, if we go to /logout, in the login field, when I press login, I want to see a login kind of loading indicator when we are loading. So to do that, we're going to make a new component. So inside of components, we're going to say loading indicator like that, .jsx. We've already got the CSS written for it, but now we're just going to write the component, which is very straightforward. So we're going to say import /styles/loading indicator. If we can type this, indicator.css. Okay, we're then going to say const loading indicator, and this is going to be, actually, we'll make this as an arrow function. Okay. Then we're just going to return here a div. For the div, we're going to say class name is equal to loading container. And then we're going to have a div, and this is going to be class name is equal to loader. And then we're just going to export default the loading indicator. Okay, now we can use this anywhere that we want. So we're going to go to our form, and let me just make this a bit smaller. Inside of our form, in between the last input and the button, we're just going to write some conditional rendering here. So we're going to say loading and then the loading indicator like that. And we just need to make sure we import the loading indicator from the loading indicator component. So pretty straightforward. We're just going to show the loading indicator when we're loading, and then the CSS that I wrote inside of the loading indicator file here will automatically do like the nice animation for us. So if we go back here now, you should see it kind of pops up here, right? While we're waiting for this. Okay, click OK. And there you go. The loading indicator component has now been written. So with that said, guys, that is going to wrap up the front end. At this point now, we have the front end finished. We have the back end finished. Everything is working on localhost. The next step here is going to be to deploy a database, connect to the database, and then we're going to deploy both the back end and the front end using Choreo. So let's go ahead and do that, starting with our database. All right, so now that the front end and the back end are finished, we're going to be deploying our database. Now, as a reminder, we're going to be using Choreo to do that. This is completely free. They're also the ones that are running that challenge for the Cybertruck or the $100,000. So really follow along with these steps here if you want to make sure that you're eligible to enter that. So what we're going to have to do here is go to the Choreo website. I'm going to leave a link to it in the description. Once you're here, you got to create a new account or log into an existing one. I'm going to do that. Please do that, and then we'll be brought to a portal, and I'll kind of show you how we create the database. All right, so once you sign into your Choreo account, you will be brought to the dashboard. Now from here, you can do a lot of stuff, and you can actually create a project, but the first thing we want to do is just create the database integration. After that, we're going to make a project. Within that project, we're going to create some components. We're going to have our backend and our front end, and we're going to use Choreo to actually link these two together. This is a really cool platform. It's actually really fast to be able to spin up and deploy different applications. Best part is it's free when you're in the developer tier, and obviously you can upgrade if you wanted to do more production-ready deployments. Okay, so what we're going to do is go to the Dependencies tab on the left-hand side of the screen, and we're going to click on Databases. Now it's going to bring us to this page right here. And what we can do is we can create a new database. Now I'm just going to delete the one that I already have because I can only have one going at a time. And this is going to act as a trial database. It's not really meant to be production ready, but it's just allowing you to mess with the features and try it out. So it's a good thing to get some practice on how we actually deploy regular databases and how we connect to them from Django. So what I'm going to do is create a new database. I'm going to select PostgreSQL. And for the name, I'm just going to call this database. You can call it whatever you want, but make sure you select Postgres. Okay, now you're only going to have one option here for the hosting. The reason for that is because this is kind of like a free trial demo database under the developer tier. So you can see you can try it out for free for 7 days, and then you'd have to recreate it if you wanted to keep using it. So I'm going to go United States, DigitalOcean, and hobbyist plan here. It says 3 cents per hour, but don't worry, you don't have to pay for it. It is free. And then it's going to create this service. Now it'll take a few minutes to spin up the database. And one thing to know is that this is a trial database, so it's going to be powered off every hour. So what that would mean is if it is powered off, you got to come back here and just power it on manually. But for development purposes, this is totally fine. So while this spins up, what we're going to do is copy all of the values that we have here into an environment variable file in our, backend kind of Python script or backend Python project. So let's set that up while this is creating. So I'm going to go back here and I'm just going to close all of this, and we're going to open up our backend directory, and we're going to go to just the main kind of root directory here, and we're going to create an env file. So we're going to say .env. For the env file, we're going to specify a few variables, and then we're going to use the values from this page here as those values. So the first variable we need is going to be our db_host. We're then going to have our db_port. Okay. We're then going to have our db_user and our db_name and our password db_pwd. Okay, so now we're just going to take all the values from here and we're going to copy them into the corresponding variables. So let's copy the host to start. We're going to put a set of quotes and paste that in here. For the port, this is going to be 21510. So let's paste that over here. For the user, it's going to be this. Let's make sure we put that inside of quotes here. And for the name, it's going to be default DB. And then we'll need to wait for the service to be created before we have access to the password. And actually, I'm just going to surround this in quotes because that's what I have in my demo project, so I don't want to mess anything up. Okay, so let's wait for this to finish. It's going to give us the password. We can click to view it, and then we'll put it in the environment variable file, and we'll be good to move on to the next steps. All right, so the service has been created here, and I just copied the password and put it in my environment variable file. Now that we've created the database, what we want to do is connect to it from Django, and then we can provision it using Python's manage.py, or what exists here inside of Django, and then we can just use our application like we normally would, except this time we'll be connected to a remote database. So in order to do that, we need to go into Backend, settings.py, and we're going to go to the databases. So where it says databases here, what we're going to do is change a bunch of these things. So where it says engine, we're going to change the engine to be Django in lowercase, .db, .backends, .postgres, SQL, like that. Then for the name, this is going to be the environment variable, which is os.getEnv, and we're going to get the DB name. Now, the reason why this works is because at the very top of our code, we load in our environment variable file, and we have all of those variables in the env file. So make sure they're there for this to work. Okay. So now that we have the name, the next thing that we need is the user. So we're going to say the user is equal to os.getEnv. And this is going to be the db_user. We then need the password. The password is going to be os.getEnv. And this is going to be the db_pwd for password. We then are going to have the host, and the host is going to be os.getEnv, and this is going to be the host, or the db_host, I should say. And then lastly, we need the port, and the port is going to be os.getEnv, and then db_port. Okay, and let's make sure we have our commas. So that's it. That will configure our database. So now that we have all of our environment variables loaded in, we can actually connect to the database. What we need to do now is let's bring up our terminal. I'm going to stop running the backend here. So let's stop that. And for some reason, I think we were getting an error where it was saying that this was typed wrong. It was. Okay, so I just spelled that incorrectly. So let me fix that quickly. And now what we're going to do is type Python manage.py and then migrate. What this is going to do is connect to that remote database. So you're going to notice this will take quite a bit longer because we actually need to connect over the internet. We're not connecting locally. So once this is finished, I'll be right back. Okay, so this code just finished running. So now what we can do is type Python manage.py and then run server. And now our server will be running just like before. And what we can do is we can go back here and we can start using our app as we normally would. So now we're going to be in a new database. So we'll need to make any accounts again. So I'll make an account, set the password. Okay, you're going to notice it will take longer now because again, we're connecting to that remote database, not the local one. So let's try to sign into our account. Okay, log in. Let's wait. And it should bring us to the home page. There you go. We have the home page and we could go and we could make our notes. So now we're just connected to the remote database. If we want to see the logs, we can go and view it. We can see metrics, advanced settings, all kinds of stuff here. Very useful and also super, super easy to use. If we want, we can also gate access based on IPs, all kinds of settings you can mess with here. So now that we've deployed the database, it's time to deploy the backend. Now to deploy the backend, we first need to actually set up a Git repository because Choreo will be able to view the Git repository, read it, and actually automatically respond to new commits and do automatic deployments and all kinds of cool stuff. So we're going to go over to our code here and we're going to start setting this up to work for a Git repository. Now to do that, we're going to create a new file. So we're going to make a new file called git ignore. Okay. Inside of the git ignore, we're going to ignore the environment variable directory because, or the environment, what do you call it? Python virtual environment directory because we don't need that. We're then going to go to frontend and we're going to go to our git ignore and we're just going to add the .env file because we don't want to include that in the git repo. And we're going to go to backend and we're going to make a git ignore. And inside backend, we're going to ignore the .env and the db.sqlite3, which we want to ignore as well. Okay, now that we've done that, we're just going to make a few deployment related files inside of our backend directory, and then we'll upload this to GitHub. So we're going to start by doing a .choreo folder. Now inside of .choreo, we're going to make a new file, and this is going to be endpoints.yaml. Now, this is where we're going to specify the endpoints that we want to deploy and that we want to expose from this specific component, which is the backend. Now, Choreo obviously will look inside of this .choreo folder to find this configuration. So we're going to write here the version, which is 0.1. We're then going to specify our endpoints. Now, for the endpoints, we're going to specify a name. The name can just be REST API. It doesn't really matter what you call it. And now we're going to specify a few other things. So we're going to do the port. The port is going to be 8000. The context is going to be a single /. The type is going to be REST. And the network visibility is going to be public. Now this is a basic configuration that Choreo is going to look for when we're deploying a REST API. The port obviously needs to match the port of our Django API, which is 8000. Type, of course, is going to be REST because this is a REST API. When we set the network visibility to public, that means anyone will be able to view this. We also could specify it as project or organization. And then for the context, this is the base path of the API that we want to expose. In this case, I just want to expose the entire one, so I'm going with /. Okay, and that's what you guys will use as well. Obviously, there's a lot of details for this in the documentation on the Choreo website. You guys can check that out if you want to learn more about how to set up these configurations, especially for something a bit more advanced. Now, we also need to make one more file. This will be the last one that we need to do, and this is called the proc file. And the proc file is going to specify the command to start executing our application. And that command is going to be web : and then Python manage.py, and then run server, and then it's going to be 0.0.0.0 port 8000. Okay, so exactly what we would normally do to execute our server, except this time we're doing 0.0.0.0, which means run on any origin or on the public IP address of the server that we're executing on. So this way it'll be public and anyone will be able to access it. Perfect. So that's it for the kind of configuration. Now what we need to do is add this to GitHub. So we're going to make a new Git repository with the command git init. We're going to type git add dot, and then git commit -m, and then first commit. Okay, so we just make a commit. We are then going to change the branch. So we're going to type git branch -m, and then main. This is going to change the branch from master to main, which we need to do when we push to git. We're going to clear this, and we're going to go over to Git, make a new remote repo, and then add it here and push this code to GitHub. So I'm on GitHub here, and I've just made a new repo called Django React Full Stack App. It's important that we make this public because in the developer tier for Choreo, we can only have public repositories. We're not going to add a README. We already have the repository set up. We just need to add the origin and then push our code. So we're just going to take this command right here, which is git remote add origin. And we're going to move over here and paste this in our terminal. Okay, we're then going to push this. So git push -u origin and then main. And this will push all of the code to the remote repo so we can then start setting up our deployment. Okay, so let's go back here and let's refresh. We'll see here when we refresh, we get all of our code popping up. Now what we can do is go back here to Choreo and we can go to the overview tab. So now that all of this is set up on GitHub, we're going to create a new project in Choreo. Now to do that, you can go to the overview tab and then click on create project, or you can go up here and make a new project. So I'm going to click on create project. I'm going to call this Django React tutorial. And I'm going to use the mono repo because we just have one repo that contains all of our project code. So we're going to go next and we're going to authorize this with GitHub. Now you're going to have to go through a few steps here to authorize it. It's very straightforward. Just give it access to your repos. Then what you're going to need to do is go to the GitHub repository and select the one you want. So in my case, it's Django React Full Stack App. Now here you can select the branch. I've selected main because that's the only branch that I have, but you could set up a separate deployment branch and that would probably be a good idea. So let's go next and notice that it's actually automatically going to detect our different components. Now I want to show you how we manually create them. So I'm just going to click on create for now. It's going to go ahead and make the new project and then we can add the components ourselves. So let's go ahead and do that. The first thing we're going to do is add a new service. The service is going to be for our REST API. So I'm going to click on service here. And for the component name, I am going to go with the backend. And for the description, we'll just leave it empty. And I'm going to select Python as my build pack. Now for the Python directory, I'm going to select backend. Okay. And for the language version, I'm going to go with 3.10. So let's go ahead and click create. And notice there's a bunch of other services you could make here. Okay, so Choreo is going to automatically go ahead and make this backend service for us. And while it does that, I'm going to create the front end service. Now for the front end service, we're going to go with a web application. For the name, this is going to be the front end. And for the build pack, this is going to be React. Now for the project directory, this is going to be the front end. Okay. And for the build command, this is going to be npm install and npm run build. We're then going to have the build path as /dist. This is where the output file will go when we actually build this application. Then for the node version, we're going to go with 20.0. You can go with any version you want, really. I think as long as it's high enough, but 20.0 should be fine. Okay, so that should be good. That's going to create the front end component for us. And now what we'll need to do is build each of these components and then deploy them. Now, there's a few other steps as well, obviously, but this is pretty straightforward and it's actually pretty impressive how fast we can get this deployed out. Okay, so let's go back to our backend. We can do that by just selecting the service up here. And from our backend, we're going to go to the build tab. Now you'll notice that there's a bunch of other tabs here, right? Like usage insights, observability, DevOps, testing the API, deploying, managing, right? It's got everything you can imagine. Now what we can do is build latest, or we can view the different commits and we can build a specific commit. In our case, we just want to build latest. So we're going to click on build latest. We're going to wait for a little bit. It should build the latest version of this, and then we can go ahead and deploy it and we can test the API. All right, so the build has just completed. And now what we'll do is go over to deployment. Now from deployment, we can deploy the build. You also will have noticed from the build tab, we have the option to auto deploy. If we enable that as soon as a build is finished, or actually as soon as a new commit is made on our branch, it will automatically build it and then deploy it. Now you can see that what we can do here is configure and deploy. So if I click on this, it gives me the option to actually mount some environment variables. Now that's actually what I'll do now, because remember, we need to pass the environment variables for our database configuration. So what we can do is add a bunch of environment variables. In this case, it's just allowing us to do one. So I'm actually going to do it another way. I'm just going to click on next. We have the option to file mount, endpoint details here. This is fine. We can go ahead and deploy that. And once this first version is deployed, it's going to give us the option to configure some secrets. So I'm going to click on manage config and secrets. And here I'm going to click on create, and then I'm going to go secret and environment variable. Now, the reason this is secret is because I don't want anyone to be able to view this once it's been created. This is going to be the data to connect to my database. Now, what we'll do here is just add the different environment variables that we need that match what we had in our local repo. I'm going to call this env. And then what I'm going to do is go back to my code here. I'm going to go find my environment variable file, which is this, and I'm going to copy all of these values over. So let me do that and I'll be right back. All right, so I've added all of these values, and notice that I've not used quotation marks for any of them. I'm just adding them as plain text inside of here. I have my host, port, user, name, and password, the exact same as I had from the environment variable file in my local repository. What I'm going to do now is press on create. This is going to add the environment variables as secrets. Now, if you want to edit them, you'll have to actually re-add all of the values because you can't view the contents anymore. We'll go back to deploy. And within deploy now, it should automatically redeploy with those environment variables. So now what will happen is our API will be deployed. If we want to view the endpoints, we can view them right here. We can see the project URL and the public URL. However, the public URL is automatically going to be protected from Choreo. Now, the way that this works is that Choreo is automatically going to add an API key that we need to pass in order to access this URL. So if I just try to go to the URL, in fact, I can do that just to show you, you'll notice that it's not going to work. So if I go to the public URL and I paste it in here, it's just going to tell me, hey, like you don't have the correct security credentials to be able to view this. Now that's intentional because Choreo will automatically protect your APIs for you. And if you want to disable the protection, which is what we're going to do, you need to do that manually. So what we're going to go to now is the settings page within manage. Sorry for the quick cut here, but I do need to quickly jump in because the website has changed a little bit since I filmed this video. So I just want to show you quickly how to get to the correct page so that none of you are lost. So in the video, what you're going to see me do is go to this manage tab, and then from manage, go to settings. Now that's no longer available. And instead, what you're going to need to do is go to the deploy tab and then simply click on endpoint configurations. From this point forward, all of the settings and all of the instructions I give you are the same. Simply do them from this page rather than the page you're seeing in this video. Now from here, what we're going to do is change the API visibility to be public. Now we want this to be public so that anyone can access this API and use it to interact with our application. Now, as well as that, we're going to go and press on edit. Now from edit, we're going to change some of the settings here by disabling the application level security. Now, this tells you exactly what it does. This option determines the type of security that will be used to secure the API. An API can be secured with either OAuth or any other available security type, or it can be secured with both of them. If OAuth 2 option is selected, relevant API will require a valid OAuth 2 token for successful invocation. So we want to disable that because we already have our JWT tokens, and for this example, it's going to be a little bit complex to have this enabled. So what we'll do is disable this and press on save. When we do that, what's going to happen now is that when we try to access the API, we will actually be able to send a request to it, whereas before we would need to pass an API token, and that would add kind of some more code changes, which I don't want to make at this point because we've already done quite a few changes. So now that we've changed our settings, what we're going to do is go back to the deploy tab, and if you haven't already, just redeploy the API to make sure the new settings are applied. Now we can go view the endpoints, and if we take the public URL, if we paste it in here, we can see if this is working or not, or if we get any issues. Now in this case, it just says bad request, which is fine because it means we were actually able to access the API. But what happened was we didn't have a security, issue like we had before, right? So here we just access a route that didn't exist. But if I go to something like /API/token, we can see if that one's going to load. And in this case, it gave us some connection error, which tells me there's probably some issue with the database connection. So let's actually go check that quickly. The way we can do that is we can go to observability and we can go to metrics, and we can actually see all of the logs for what's happening with our application. So let's go here, give it a second to load and see what we're getting. We can also see the throughput, the latency, and some other issues, or not other issues, other stats, I guess, which are meaningful. Okay, so when we go here, it just says that we're not able to connect to the database. So what most likely happened is the database just turned off because it's been an hour. So let me return the database back on. And in fact, I'll show you how we do that. So what I can do is get out of this project, go to dependencies, databases, and we'll see if that was the culprit. And it was. You can see the database is powered off. So what I'm going to do is just power on this service. It's going to take a second to power back on. And we'll go back into our application. So Django React tutorial. We'll just give it a minute to power back on. We'll go into our components. We'll go into our backend, and we'll just redeploy this as soon as the database is powered back on. And we should be good to go and actually able to, well, interact with the application and the API. All right, so the database is powered back on. So let's just redeploy our app here to make sure that everything is all good. We'll wait for that to finish. And then what we can do is go to the endpoint and we can test this again just to see if everything is functioning. Now, assuming the backend is working, then the next step is to deploy the front end. Once we have the front end deployed, we just need to connect it to the backend. And once the two are connected, we'll have a fully deployed application. And you'll actually have a project that you can submit to the Choreo WSO2 challenge to potentially win the Cybertruck. Don't forget about that. So now our backend has been successfully deployed, and it's time to move on to the front end. So what we're going to do is make a new component. We're going to go to the front end component, I should say. And from the front end now, we're going to go to build. We're going to build the latest version of our front end. And once this is built, we're going to check out the front end, and then we're going to connect it to the backend. So the front end has been built. We could enable auto deploy if we want, but I'm just going to go over to deploy. And now we will deploy this. Now there's a few settings that we need to change first of all. So we're going to go to authentication settings, and we're going to disable the managed authentication with Choreo. As I talked about before, we're not using the authentication for this specific app. However, if you were building this from the ground up and you wanted to use the authentication from Choreo, obviously you would enable this, and they have some really good documentation that shows you how to handle auth using the Choreo platform. They can do user authentication, they can do application level authentication. It's very interesting, so I definitely recommend checking it out. But just for this app, since the whole point was to look at JWT tokens in Django, we don't need this feature. So I'm going to click on deploy. And now that we've disabled that, it's going to deploy this. It's going to take a second. And once this has been deployed, we should see the front end working. So let's click on this web app URL, and we're getting a not found error. Okay, so let's give it a second here because it probably just needs a minute to spin up. Let's go to it again. And not found. Okay, let me look at the issue here and I will be right back. All right, so I just had to deploy the app and wait a second, and there we go. We now see that we have our front end and this is deployed. We can go to register. If we try to go to something that doesn't exist, we'll get that not found page. We can go back to register here, but you'll notice that if I try to actually use this to make a new account, it's not gonna work now. And the reason it doesn't work is because we're not connected to the backend. So let's now go with the connection, and then that will wrap up this video. So in order to make the connection here, what we need to do is go to dependencies and then connections. Now what Choreo can do, which is really interesting, is actually deploy our backend on the same origin as our front end, or at least allow us to make the request on the same origin so that we don't need to be interacting with something that's outside of this origin, which is actually quite useful for a lot of applications. So you're going to see that I clicked on create there. And what I'm going to do is use my backend REST API. So I'm going to go backend REST API here. I'm going to select that. We'll just call this backend as the connection name and click on create. Now that we've done this, you're going to see a bunch of instructions on the right-hand side for how to do this connection. Now this is if you were using the authentication handled by Choreo. In our case, we are not, so we don't need to follow the steps on the right-hand side. But if you are, again, check out these steps. The authentication is a very useful feature, especially if you don't build it in yourself like we have with Django. So what we're going to do here is copy this service URL. Now this service URL is hosted on the same domain as our front end, which means we can send requests to this, and then whatever we add afterwards is the API route that will be redirected to. So the way that we're going to do this is we're going to go back to our repository here. I'm just going to close all of this, and I'm going to go to my front end directory and to api.js. Now all I'm going to do is I'm going to say const API URL is equal to, and I'm going to paste this route in here. Now notice I'm not putting a different domain. I'm just putting the path that will be on the same domain. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for the presence of this environment variable file. If it exists, I'm going to use what's inside of there. Otherwise, I'm going to use the API URL. Now let me just format this so it's a bit easier to read. So what this will do now is it will use this when we're in the deployed environment, which is the connection that we need to our backend. So what we can do now is we can make a new commit. So we can say git add dot and then git commit -m add backend URL. And then we can type git push origin main and we can make a push. Now what we'll need to do is just redeploy the front end with this new commit. And what will happen is now the front end will make a request to its same origin with this /URL as the base URL. And then it will add the API path afterwards. So we'll go to like API/token or register or whatever the URLs are. So that's it. That's really all we have to do for the connection. It's quite easy. I'm pretty impressed with how Choreo has been able to handle this. And what we can do is go back to build now. And we can go to build latest. So let's view the commits first of all. Okay, we have the backend URL. So let's go with build latest and build that out. Okay, so our front end is now built. So let's go back to deploy and let's deploy the new version here. Okay, so that's going to take a second to deploy. And once that's finished, everything should be good to go. Fingers crossed. Obviously things can go wrong, but if that's the case, we could go and we could check out the logs. We can use all of the tools that Choreo has built into the platform. Now let's go to the web URL. Okay, there we go. We have Vite plus React. Let's go to /register and make a new account. Okay, so we got to spell register correctly though. Okay, so let's go with new user and then we'll go with a password here. Okay, good sign that it's taking a second to load. That means it's probably connected to the remote database. Okay, so that account was created. So now let's try to log into this. Okay, and then we should be able to view our notes. Okay, so stop telling me to change my password. I know it's very weak, that's fine. So let's make a new note, say new note, test content. Let's submit that. Should take a second here. The note should be added. Then we'll be able to view them, delete them, etc. Now I know there's a little bit of latency. It's just because of the database that we're using. So it takes a second to make all of those operations. But if you're using one that was actually deployed, that wasn't kind of the trial or like the temporary test database, obviously this would be a lot faster. All right, so the new note has been added here and we can see that all of the functionality is working properly. I guess the last thing we could do is log out. And when we do that, it brings us back to the login page and then we can log in with another account. So there you go. We now have a fully deployed application, completely for free, by the way, that you could now use to enter this Cybertruck giveaway. So with that said, guys, I'm going to wrap up the video here. All of this code will be available on GitHub, so you can simply download it from the link in the description. You can modify it, tweak it, whatever you need to do. A big thank you to Choreo for sponsoring this video and for hosting that giveaway. Make sure you check out the platform more and you enter that giveaway. Again, you have a chance to win a Cybertruck or $100,000. And then there's going to be 10 other people that are picked to win a MacBook Pro 14-inch with a M3 chip. I'll wrap it up here, guys. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next one.